We're in for a big treat today with Jessica Richards' trend presentation out of the gate, follow-up conversation on space. And well, now we really need to rethink our space and how, what the office needs to look like from a health perspective and from an aesthetics perspective. And then we also have a financial presentation. I just did that order wrong. Finance in between, but all the things that we need to know about money for ourselves and making decisions. We have experts to answer all of the questions. So give us just another minute or two and we will get going. In the meantime, if you want to take any pictures along the way or tag us on social, I have all of our information is right on the screen. And I also will take a moment to thank LIM College, who generously sponsored this whole series, which allowed us to offer it at no charge to all of our attendees. And so we really appreciate them. LIM College is the school for the business of fashion. If you haven't checked it out, definitely do. It's an amazing place to find interns. Just, their backgrounds are, they're getting an education that they don't really get in other, design only schools. So great kids and great place to go if you want to continue your own education too. All right, let's see. I have 12 o'clock on the button, which allows me to get things started on day 3 of our business workshop. And I get to introduce Jessica Richards. Jessica has become a great friend to the Accessories Council. Hopefully you're all checking out her trend sections in Accessories Magazine. If you haven't seen the latest issue or the past issues, they're all available on our website, accessoriescouncil.org. You can just click on and check out Jessica's work in the magazine. And we are already hard at work on the next issue. I can't wait to share all of the great articles that we have coming up. But anything that Jessica's working on, you have an opportunity to be a part of. If you're following our newsletter that comes out every week, we put our editorial requests in there. So if you send your photos and your images, when we're putting together those editorial pages, you'll have the chance to be a part of it. So we were fortunate to meet Jessica a few years ago, and she has become an integral part and a beloved part of the Accessories Council team, and also has been sharing her amazing presentations with us now for over a year. And it's fun to see some of her predictions come to life. Now in the stores, we're seeing product at the trade shows. We both saw, let's see, Jessica, where were we? Jessica, come on and join us if you can. There you are. Jessica and I have been joined at the hip the last couple of weeks. We were in Atlanta at the Mart there, walking the show, and then in Las Vegas last week at Magic and Project and Win, checking it all out. So we'll have some updates on those shows to share with you all soon too. But Jessica, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can share yours and tell us what we can expect coming up.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you to the Accessories Council for inviting me to be part of the business workshop. As Karen mentioned, I'm Jessica Richards. I am the founder of JMR Design Consulting, where I offer bespoke trend forecasting services for individual clients, as well as design and product development consulting. I'm going to quickly share my screen. And as I say at the beginning of all of my presentations, this is always the most challenging part for me. So hopefully this goes off without a hitch. so excited to be able to present my fall 22 mega trends today. And as Karen mentioned, as you're seeing the presentation, if there are any ideas that you love, that you're super excited about, please take a screenshot and post and tag both myself and the Accessories Council, because we really do love to see what the trends are that everyone's gravitating toward. Um, Kicking off the fall 2022 season, the name of this season I'm calling High Impact. It's the idea that we have come out of the spring 2022 season at this point, and we're starting to think forward and continue to reimagine what our aesthetic and our sense of styling looks like in a post-pandemic world. Before I kick off, I would be remiss if I did not thank someone that's been helping me this season, whose name is Liz Lamanna. Liz has been so excellent in helping me do research. I do have the notes because I don't want to get this wrong. Liz has a bachelor's in fashion merchandising from Kent, and she's been working remotely with me this season from Florence, where she is attending Polymoda to get her master's in international fashion business. So I know that Liz is going to be coming back after this semester. So I would love to connect with anyone if you're looking for someone with that kind of background. So going back to fall 2022, this idea that we had kicked off the year thinking of concepts around the handle of I just can't get enough. So if you weren't able to attend our spring 2022 presentation, just a few major notes from that. This is a season that we had talked about the return to sparkle, the idea of opulence and optimism, and wanting to be seen in the world again. So all of these ideas are going to continue forward into fall 2022 as well. But one of the biggest design tenets and ideas that I think we need to wrap our head around is the idea of reimagining things. So perhaps the past 18 months haven't necessarily been what we thought they would be, or we didn't really imagine that we would be living through a global pandemic in our lifetimes. So there's almost an idea to have the opportunity to reframe our thoughts and think about what things could be and how they could be different, even if they aren't going according to plan. So this idea of reconnecting with some of the values or the concepts or the ideas that we may have missed are really going to build the foundation for what the fall 2022 season is about. If you've not attended these presentations, this presentation will be to focus on the big concepts of the season. And then we'll have a breakout session in about a month or so where we really go through the checklist of items. So today is more about the big ideas of what is happening. The first concept that we're going to talk about is called school days. So it's the idea of being influenced by the thought of school, the thought of the uniform, the thought of structure, and especially when kids weren't able to go to school or they weren't able to be in person. This idea that as people, we're kind of seeking that structure and that idea of uniform and getting back to basics a little bit and how that affects our styling. The next will be called extreme conditions, and it's the idea of the great outdoors, which we know has been so influential in past seasons, especially post-lockdowns. This idea of getting back out to nature, getting back outside again. That's really going to be so pivotal for ideas around color and as well as print and pattern. And then finally, the idea of the royals. What does opulence look like in 2022, especially as we've had so many conversations around equality? So how are we balancing all of these ideas and what does that look like? And that final concept, I think, will really have us thinking about hardware and different ideas of decoration as well. Some of the big ideas that we're seeing in the market that I also believe will be very influential for this season, this idea of new heritage. So again, the idea of reimagining things maybe a little bit different than they've historically been. Two brands that I think are really capitalizing on this idea at the moment are Swarovski and Tiffany. So if you're familiar with the changes at Swarovski, there's been an appointment of Giovanna Engelbert as creative director, which is a newly created position for her. And she's really been brought on to reimagine what that brand looks like from a silhouette perspective, as well as a marketing and in-store experience. And I can say that I am wholeheartedly a fan. I really have especially enjoyed the in-store experience in New York on Lower Broadway and being able to go into the store. It's like being inside of a jewel box. It's very cool. And then also the idea of Tiffany, which being LVMH backed, is thinking about how to bring in a younger and more fashion forward clientele. This campaign has been quite controversial. So if you're interested in learning more, I would definitely say to read up a bit on that. The next big idea that I thought was worth considering for this season is the idea of reimagining what jewelry can mean or what accessories can mean, especially in terms of function. So in the past 18 months, we've been thinking not just about equality, but the idea of ableism and how there's a discrepancy between the idea of everyone is able to participate. There's different formats, there's different concepts of technology that we've been asked to embrace that maybe we're not created for everyone to be part of. So this idea of ableism has really been a major thought process. And I think that it's also being considered in design, even in fashion design. And one great example is this idea from the brand Yemen, I think is the pronunciation. And they had reimagined the idea of what a prosthesis looks like. Could it be somehow merged with the idea of jewelry? Does function have to be plain, or is there the ability for us to consider decoration in other ways? And then finally, in big ideas is the concept of what upcycling will look like, especially in the luxury market as we move forward. Does everything around recycling or upcycling or sustainability have to feel so eco and sort of organic colors and sort of so a more plain point of view? As we've seen from Miu Miu, which we discussed a little bit in the last seasonal forecast, that's not necessarily the case. There's always room for decoration, and especially brand right decoration. So a new thought process around upcycling with Trouble Andrews, continuing collaboration with Gucci, where he is using selvage fabrics from the Gucci collection to redecorate pants. It was one example, but different pieces in the collection. So could upcycling, could sustainability look rare? Could it look luxurious? What are the different ideas that we can bring in so that we're not just thinking about recycled materials or organic color palettes or something that's a little bit more plain? Could it feel a little bit more luxe and in the next echelon? We'll move through color, we'll go through our first concept, and then I'm actually going to open up the floor for any questions. So as I'm going along, you can add those into the chat box, and then Karen will join us to quickly go through those. A few big color messages. Purple, finally, I believe, will actually have its moment. So every season we talk about pink. Pink continues on. Pink feels good. It's universally flattering. I have often felt that purple has been tried to be incorporated from season to season, and it's been a little bit more challenging, but I think we're finally seeing that this is going to be the season of purple. Now, that's not to say that pink goes away. I think we've realized that the customer is very keen for pink, and that that's something that becomes in evergreen, to use another color word, part of our collection. So just consider pink as a neutral in the go forward. And then from a fashion point of view, we'll be seeing a lot more in the purples family. I think the other thing to note as we're considering color palettes, and we've discussed this in seasons past, is that colors that typically have been considered pastel or just for spring or just for a certain season have a longer longevity. They're added in new styling ways, and they make them feel fall appropriate and not just for the spring seasons that they've normally been relegated to. The idea of blue, especially cool blues, bright pop blues, this is a season of exciting color. And as we get into our breakout sessions in a month, we'll really be talking about how the color messages are all about quirky piecing of colors and how color and color direction are more pivotal and critical than ever. We've had a few seasons of really neutral-based palettes. We're moving into another season where we're seeing a lot of browns. That idea of refreshing our wardrobe and our key items has been so critical in 2021. In 2022, we're going to see that return to opulence and the idea that color is such a major driver for our collections. So blues will be bright, they'll be really exciting. And again, we love this idea of the quirky color combinations in pieced garments. And then the always controversial green we'll be seeing to continue. Now, blues and greens we're talking about so much for spring 2022, they continue to be important into the fall season as well. If we think about that time that we were really removed from the outdoors and that we are still designing into these future seasons, thinking about that, we'll see that that is reflected in the color palettes and in the collections for seasons to come. It's also been seasons where warms and brights have really driven the color palettes. So I think that in fall 2022, we'll be seeing that the cools will predominantly rule the palettes. So moving into our first major concept, the concept called school days. So this concept is really driven again by the idea of looking for a bit of structure, looking for a bit of grounding, something that we weren't able to experience as much in the past 18 months as we have traditionally been able to do. So not just this idea of going to school, maybe this idea of youth and nostalgia, which we've talked about as conceptual ideas for 2022, but also the idea of a uniform, of structure, of having something that's grounding us and centering us. All of those combined are really driving this idea of this school and uniform driven concept. We'll see a lot of graphic tees. We'll see a lot of athletic numbers. I think we'll also be seeing a bit of rugby stripes as well as plaids. And if you see, there are a couple images with socks in them, which you'll notice are going to become a major accessory for this season as well, not just because it's a personal favorite of mine. We have some great items in this concept as well. The idea of the soft Mary Jane, the soft flat shoe. It's the evolution of where we've been typically with the ballet slipper in the seasons past. We've also talked about a lot of actual house slipper or house shoe driven silhouettes. Now this is the continuation by adding this strap for this season. As we're going to talk about, socks will continue to be so important, not just from a comfort point of view, but also the idea that it's really grounding our styling. So we're able to wear some of these silhouettes like the fisherman sandal longer into the season. So this could be a late summer item that rolls into early fall deliveries as well. Clogs continue on, especially with the socks. I think this is just really great and directional, but this idea that the clog, the more traditional silhouette, we're also seeing quite a bit from a fashion perspective on a higher lug or a platform, but the clog has started in fall of this year and will continue for seasons to come. We've really talked about comfort footwear driving that market so much. So this is an idea that the customer is really responding to, and we'll be seeing that will continue to move forward. In sneakers, we'll also be seeing that the idea of the lug or the platform sole will be moving forward as well. Loafers and socks, so this plain loafer or this lug sole loafer or creeper, mixing it back to the white sock, a big styling direction, especially around the idea of uniformity for fall 22. In handbags, we'll be talking about geometric shapes, a lot of very shaped or interesting kind of shape details and angles. And then also in bags, we'll see a lot of a top flap detail. Now, if we think about a more traditional book bag, this could be driving this idea of security over your bag, but also a little bit more in that school uniform type idea. In handbags, we're also seeing the half moon shape. The Burberry bag has been really directional this season and widely shown in the market. So I do believe that will be very influential. And we're also just seeing, as there's so much of the shoulder bag or crossbody bag, that the way that sits on the body is quite flattering. There's also a bit of handheld bags. So we've talked about this a bit in spring 22 as well. The idea that the top handle, it feels like you're safe, you're present, you know that your bag is with you. So we'll see this detail moving forward into this season. And then also with the idea of the handheld, the oversized clutch. So especially like the image on the left, the Fendi oversized clutch has been quite directional this season. And I think that we'll see that moves forward, especially if they're able to have organization or any sort of carrying ability for all of your belongings. And we've talked about that actually quite a bit in our presentations. As Karen mentioned, we've been attending the trade shows and talking through some of the bigger design concepts, but this idea in handbags, that organization, structure, and the ability to securely carry your belongings has been very important. In accessories, we'll also see novel hosiery. So if we think about the idea of excess or more is more really being rulers of the 2022 fashion pyramid, top of the pyramid for the year, this idea of novel hosiery, adding another pattern, adding another element of decoration to yourself will really be something that we'll see moving forward. So not just the socks. So Karen, I'm going to throw it to you to see if there's any questions.
All right. Well, I'm going to encourage everyone to put their questions into the chat box along the way. You can also raise your hand or you can text them to me, however you get them to me. I'll make sure that we ask Jessica. So right now, I don't see any questions. But oops, one's coming in as we're, yes, we will make the slides available after the presentation, but the accessoriescouncil.org, our website, has the video recap of our events on them. So not only can you take a peek at today's event on the video, but we have some of Jessica's past presentations up there for your review. So if you miss anything or you want to go back and look at it, accessoriescouncil.org will have those for you. Questions coming in, Jessica. Caftans, how important are they as more people are spending time at home?
Yes, so I think that maybe we're going to touch upon that in the next concept. Especially just to jump ahead a few slides, but this idea of crochet and the idea of knitwear has been really important. I think the other item that we'll talk about is the vest. So a lot of transitional shapes like Rwanas, caftans, sleeveless vests. We'll see a lot of those coming through in the next concept.
Okay. Question, I'm not sure I completely understand it, but I think you're going to probably address it, how the pandemic fashion trend, how these trends have either been influenced or, the pandemic and our Zoom culture is, dictating some of the trends. So we'll get to that one. Let's see, do I have everyone? I think, oh, more coming in. Embellished eyewear. Are we seeing more going forward?
Yes, I think we're going to hit on that in the third concept. And even if we don't get into that as an item, it falls into that idea of opulence, which we'll be talking about. And we had some really great embellished eyewear for spring 22. So again, and I know that there's a lot of new friends in the audience today, but this idea of things being just for one season is not really the rule anymore. We're seeing our trends and our fashion ideas carry forward for several seasons. So we did have a lot of that great embellished eyewear, and we saw some of it at the shows as well.
Okay, so I'm going to let you go forward because I'm looking at some of these questions, and I know that as you break down the trends, you're going to answer some of them. And if we don't, then we'll get to it at the end. For any of you who are new to Jessica's presentations, right now she's doing an overview, and then the next part, which will happen in about 5 to 6 weeks, we'll break down all the items that you need. So that will be a separate session. So Jessica, I'm going to let you take it away, and then I will come back. And if any of your questions didn't get answered, we will make sure we answer them at the end of the presentation.
Great, thank you. So our second concept that we'll be reviewing is called extreme conditions. And this trend, again, is about this idea to returning to the great outdoors, having the influence of nature, being outside again, and then all of the different ideas that come along with that. So as we're thinking about what that looks like, you know, kind of dressing to be prepared for anything, we're going to see that this concept also is really a major print driver and pattern driver. We'll be seeing a lot of animal directional prints. We'll also be seeing a lot of plaids. We'll be seeing a lot of color mixing or Pendleton inspired prints, I believe. But when we're thinking about this concept as well, we should be thinking about materials. So we'll be seeing a lot of boucles and brushed fleeces and a lot of nylon. So with all of those things in mind, also consider that this is driven by the thought of nature and the thought of the outdoors. So are we also being responsible in sourcing materials that combine not just the look, but also the environmental or the nature message as well? Thinking about the different materials that are applicable to this concept, warm and fuzzy. So we know that there has been so much plush, and there's been so much fleece, and there's been so much around the idea of comfort. This continues to move forward. Again, as Karen said, we have all of our past concepts that we've already posted, but this idea of comfort has come up season after season, and it continues to register in some way because we want to take that post-lockdown pandemic idea of comfort and security that we had in our homes and translate it into product into the go forward. So we'll see the plush and the fleeces not only in the low pile like the examples here, but also this longer, more high pile. So depending on the item, depending on the silhouette, both of these hair materials are important to register. The idea of crochet. So someone was asking about caftans. So I think we'll be seeing so much of this in this sort of like homespun or homemade kind of feeling knits translated into cold weather accessories, but also into caftans. And I even love the idea of registering it into the jewelry and being directional in that way as well. For hardware and for fixtures, we're seeing a lot of safety closures. So this idea that we're really buckled in, we're seeing especially in footwear, a lot of the safety closures, the Velcros and the different buckle kind of treatments, but a bit in the handbag world as well. In materials, we are seeing a lot of high shine. So if we're considering the image on the left, not only is this a major season of color and sort of color registering, whether it's going to be the mismatch or the kind of matching that's happening here, but this idea as well that the concept ties back into the great outdoors as well. So the quilting, the nylon, the high shine, and styling that back to that outdoorsy kind of feeling. In footwear, we'll be considering all weather materials and all weather details. So this lug sole, which we know has been going on and on and on, it continues to move forward. Again, we're not really moving through trends as quickly as we were. And if we're to think about one of the design ideas that we've considered in the past, this idea that having the groundedness and the security has been really critically important to the customer. So it would make sense that this lug sole, which feels really grounded, very present, would move forward into future seasons as well. And then finally, the idea of Western inspiration. So this just sort of ties into maybe the top of the pyramid for this concept, but we are seeing that the Western cowboy boot is already registering. It's already out in the streets in New York City, which to me is so interesting and great because it's very hot here. But this desire to add in that Western element ties back to the exploration thought as well as part of this concept. In opticals, a lot of mirrored lenses. We've talked about how oversized shapes have been more important than ever. Perhaps when we were thinking, 6 months ago, a year ago about design, we were thinking about the idea of goggles or the idea of medicine. So perhaps that was, thinking about all of our frontline workers. If we were optical designers, that may have had an influence on the size that we're seeing in the market. But now also this idea of mirrored lenses, even adding more into the idea of the goggle. And then our last concept is called the royals. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, the idea for this concept is the idea that opulence moves on, and optimism, and wanting to be decorated, wanting to be present. So we'll see this reflected in the shapes of ready to wear. We'll still continue to see oversized ruffles. We'll be seeing a lot of bow details move forward. We're seeing a lot of collections like Katie, which is in the bottom left side with the leather skirt, brands like that have these exaggerated peplums. We'll see a lot of materials that are brocades, very ornate. We'll see a lot of paisleys. So this idea of how royalty can translate into the everyday will be very important as we're thinking through this concept. Some other materials we'll continue to see a lot of mesh, a lot of fishnet. So this could be decorative on hats or cold weather accessories. We'll also see it going into the hosiery market. In terms of top of the pyramid materials or details, feathers are also really becoming more critically important, especially in very bright or optimistic colors. We know from the image on the far left that the Bottega shoe has been probably the most directional shoe of the season. We're seeing quite a bit of that. I think if we were seeing more street style, we would be seeing a lot more of that shoe as well. But then it's going all the way up through the couture shows to Valentina, like the image on the far right. In materials, we're seeing a lot of brocades and a lot of mixed colors in our materials. Again, that very royal feeling, that very opulent feeling in our handbags. In footwear, we're seeing the return of satin. Satin always comes as a material that's of importance when there is a lot of color registering in the season. So as we talked about earlier, color is such a major driver of the messaging for fall 2022. So as a result, we'll see satin, especially in the footwear category, really appearing as a saturated color material. In jewelry, we're continuing to see the pearl evolve. We've talked about pearls for countless seasons now. They were really organic, really nature-driven. Then we were seeing the personalized pearl. Now I think we'll continue to see pearl, but in a more royal and opulent sort of way. The collar necklace, this idea that a very regal sort of silhouette, but also a great driver and messenger of color and shape play. In earrings, we've actually talked about in the jewelry category how in 2022 that there's just so much of this opulence and decoration happening. We've had seasons where, going back to the question about Zoom or how the pandemic has affected our buying habits, we've seen in the jewelry category that from the shoulders up has really been the drivers in this commodity. So we've seen so many necklaces, we've seen a lot of ear parties and a lot of ear piercings being stacked up. We've seen a lot of novelty hair accessories. This continues forward. And we talked in spring 2022 about the rings, the thing. So as we're able to move further away from this idea of being paranoid about washing our hands all the time and being so hyper vigilant as we've been, that perhaps we'll have this desire to wear rings and bracelets again. But that doesn't discount from the idea that opulence still drives earrings, still drives necklaces, and all of the other silhouettes that have been going on for the past few seasons. As I mentioned, the ring was really our biggest jewelry message in spring 2022. That continues forward, and we'll see a lot of the color and size and dimension and ideas around cocktail rings. The other big ring idea that we discussed heavily in spring that we'll see moving forward into fall as well is the idea of stacking and mixing all of our rings. And I love that all of the, a few of these images have all of that incorporated, mixing the metals with the color, with the stones, and really making your hands very present for the 2022 seasons. Decorative settings. So again, this idea of regal opulence, I'll say the same words over and over again, but that's really what we're thinking about. We're thinking about super present settings that can be worn in the hair, can be worn on different jewelry silhouettes. And we'll also see this translated into ready to wear as well, especially in cut and sew knits and decoration there. The heart, it's something that we've talked about as a symbol that we've covered in the magazine. We really love the idea of the heart. I've said it a million times, but this idea of I'm wearing a heart because I have been through a pandemic. I'm wearing a heart for me. I'm wearing a heart for you. I'm giving the heart so you can carry my heart with you. But this symbol still continues to be so critically important. Post-pandemic, I think we're going to see that the heart just continues to go on and on. Any symbol of love that we can share with others after this very historically monumental time. This is driving this silhouette so much, and this idea. So where the heart may have been a more juvenile silhouette in jewelry before, we see that it's critically important for the go forward. In footwear, the idea of the high drama boot. If we're looking at the runway collections, I can say that for sure Prada has the most directional boot of the season. It's on the far left in sequin, but it was also done in print. It was also done in leather. So I do think that we'll see this idea of platform and height in the shaft and material interest all being combined, color interest. It's just really going to be such an interesting season for the boot. And the same with the platform pump. So where we've been a little bit more about comfort footwear and sort of starting to ease out of that idea, now this idea of having this hyper present platform as well as on a very high heel, maybe a little Mary Jane or ankle strap detail to really drive home this idea of the decoration. And that feels new for this season as well. Continuing the idea of strapping, we've discussed Mary Janes being important for the fall 2021 season. We're seeing straps being important again for spring 2022. This can also become a really interesting driver of detail or embroidery or stones or whatever kind of hardware that is feeling new and feeling very like a court shoe as part of this concept. As we said, pearls continue, so not just in jewelry, but we're also seeing it merge into other categories as well, especially in handbags. Love the idea, and we've discussed this in past seasons as well, of merging multiple accessories categories, whether it's jewelry and handbags, or however that might translate, jewelry and footwear, and making them sort of just one. So that middle image could even be worn as a bracelet or as a carrying ring, and then you have your small leather good attached to it. Fishnets, we discussed mesh being very important, but this idea of fishnets as well, and not just plain, but we're seeing them decorated. So the image on the far left is from the Amina Muwadi collaboration with Wolford, and this collection reflects her shoes, which are just really heavily decorated and embellished. So bringing that idea of stone and pearl and decoration into the fishnets to make them even more opulent and regal than just any pair of fishnets. Statement belts continue to move forward. This was a category that may have waned during the pandemic, but then the idea of going back to the office, going back out in the world, you know, cinching your belt, feeling complete in your look and feeling like you're structured and back out there again. We really love the idea too of hardware that's super decorated or some sort of interesting embellishment as part of the belt. And then our last item in this category is in the optical category. And it's all about this idea of colored acrylic, or bringing in some sort of tonalities into opticals. Again, this idea of the oversize is really driven by the concept of goggles and how that's been so important. But then adding in this super season of color, and then the idea of protection as well. So all of these combined really driving some of the bigger ideas and decorative moments for eyewear. So with that, I will put up my contact information briefly and then take any other questions that there may be.
Thank you. That was awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go back to some of the questions that maybe you didn't answer, and then we'll try to sort through the new ones.
Sure.
So with the school days trend, the
Yes.
importance of backpacks. What
Yes.
do we think about the backpack?
I think that the backpack and then the book bag driven silhouette will both be important, especially when we go into our breakout session. So, and then the backpack could also be merged as an idea with the great outdoors trend as well. So I would say that there's some carryover between those two.
And going back, I know there was another question about the tote bag in that trend. Mm-hmm. So really heavy on the bags.
Heavy on the bags, and the tote bag we talked about for fall 21. We've talked about it for spring 22. This is again that item that it just keeps moving forward, and it's really becoming that evergreen item. So just to step back one more step, I would say we've discussed in so many of our presentations that there's a need for evergreen items that are just going to go seasonless for us, and that there really are key items. And I think that the tote bag is just so important. It's that grab and go bag. It's that idea of structure and organization that we really need. So the tote bag for sure.
Okay. I thought I had a hands up there. If you have your hands up and you want to ask a question, you just put it into, if you could type it into the chat or the Q&A, that would be ideal. Just so we can ask everyone. And I'm just flipping through to make sure that have everything. Yeah, there's another question about the presentation. It will be available on accessoriescouncil.org. We have recorded it so you can watch the presentation. You can watch the presentation there. So Jessica, do you want to kind of explain to everyone, you start here and then how you break it out into the items section and how what can we expect from you in the next session?
Sure. So in the next session, we'll go through all of the major commodities. We'll have footwear, we'll have handbags, we'll have jewelry, and then we usually cover, especially for the fall season, it will be cold weather accessories, optical, belts, anything. I know I always feel bad because then I know that I try to have as much for everyone as possible, but it really goes into what I'll call the checklist. So that will be the 10 most important ideas or silhouettes within each of the commodities.
Do you want to expand a little bit more on eyewear? I have a couple questions on optical, sure. Coming from different places. So maybe just a little more depth on where you're thinking now.
Sure. So I would say if we're going to think about whatever the carryover would be from spring 22, we talked a lot in that season about decorated frames or the idea of embellishment. We also talked a lot about adding different chains or details onto the opticals. So a very decorated driven top of the pyramid trend. I think size is probably the most important consideration in opticals. We're seeing so much around, especially the big square size frame. So I think that we'll be talking about that in the next session. And then I also think that we are seeing that color is more critically important than ever. So like the tonal lens to the frame, we're seeing a lot with the mirrored lens, but any opportunity to have a color driver in that category is going to be key.
Terrific. I know this is going to be one of your favorite questions. Any observation about men's, what's happening in the men's world?
Yes. So I would say in men's jewelry, we've talked about this a bit, the idea of stacking and the idea of mixing, just as a a general idea for everyone, this idea of wanting to feel present, of wanting to feel very styled. I think that that translates into the men's category as well. So we're seeing that that's happening in men's already. We also discussed something in our last session that I think is important for jewelry as well, but it's this idea that we're seeing so much of the what's traditionally been women's jewelry being worn by men. So a lot of the stacking of rings, of necklaces, I mean, that was one of maybe my favorite big ideas that we've ever presented, because it just felt so impactful. So I think especially in the jewelry commodity that we're seeing so much of that. In men's bags, we can confirm a lot of the tote bag, the backpack is really important, especially as people are starting to go back to the office. They do need that commuter bag. And yeah, I would say that those are the biggest takeaways for men's. My favorite.
So maybe we want to kind of tell everybody what we saw at the shows.
Sure.
Jessica and I spent a lot of time walking in Atlanta, and we found some really great treasures. Now certainly I would say things that we saw in Atlanta and Vegas maybe were somewhat specific to that market. But then when we started to see things in both places, one of the things that really stood out to me, Jessica, was all of the sparkle.
Yes. And we had talked about, the spring 22 is the beginning of what we think will be a really opulent time, which is great. And I spoke to that at Magic as well, this celebrating the return to sparkle. So we've seen so much of that. Like you said, we saw it consistently in all of the shows and all of the markets and in every single category as well. So I think sparkle is high on the priority list for newness. And then I would say color as well. Like saw a lot more saturated color and color with depth. Again, not that traditionally pastel palette or softer neutral palette, but really moving forward with the bolder color palettes.
Yeah, I think my takeaway on the sparkles were it was on everything from lovely to kind of insane items like canes or water bottles and things that were bejeweled that you maybe wouldn't normally see bejeweled, but it actually looked pretty good.
Yes.
The way that it was done. And then in going to Vegas, what were your thoughts?
Still a lot of sparkle. And I think you had an interesting point before that's important. We had talked that coming out of the pandemic, we would probably see a lot of focus on communities and regional trends and ideas that are built out to specific areas. And I think that that's important. I think that instead of trying to have this one trend fits all applicability, that we saw that going from market to market, there maybe had like a better focus on what that particular market is looking for. And then again, these global and universal trends like the sparkle, which is a big idea. At the show in Las Vegas, we saw sparkle cowboy boots, which I mean, it kind of merges the idea of like a little bit more of a regional idea with something that was more universal in the trend. But oh yeah, we saw so much sparkle eyewear, sparkle cowboy boots. Yeah.
Everything.
Yes.
And the other thing I noticed was that, having been in the accessories industry for as long as I have been, I was surprised how many brands were there that I never heard of before or I never saw before. It felt like in those multiple shows that there were a lot of new people coming out, and that was pretty exciting to see too. I think that, besides as a trend, the trend piece, just that there's an emergence of new companies, US companies mainly, because the international ones couldn't travel, a little bit more from Mexico and South America in Vegas, but kind of exciting new things. So, you know, if you're looking for resources or you're looking to see what's out there, there's a lot of not the usual suspects to take a step.
I agree. And I think that one thing we also discussed, that there's so much of the made in the USA product, and then also a lot of ideas about found materials or sustainable materials that are coming from those specific regions or communities as well.
Yeah, there was a lot of handmade too.
Yeah.
Not in a crafty way always, but there's some lovely handmade. And in fact, in Atlanta, people were making some of the jewelry right in the booth while we were there, which was, you know, it's kind of fun to see the artists on hand. I don't want to ignore some of the other questions. So couture, any thoughts on some of the couture collections or the runway shows?
Sure. I would say, especially going back to that Valentina show, which I think was so directional, this idea of color, you know, the saturation of color, the focus on color, the way that color was styled, maybe it was head to toe in one color and then adding one other element. I thought that was a great message coming out of Couture Week. Also, in one of the slides, I had this idea of the Victor and Rolf show, which is always very politically directional and including a lot of messages from not just the fashion world. But I loved this idea of the democratization of that idea of royalty or opulence. So I think that we're seeing that the couture markets are maybe even more influenced by other factors besides, you know, they might feel a little bit more real, let's say, than they traditionally have been.
Right. All right. Any other questions? Again, if you can put them into the chat or into the comments, we have time for another question or two. And just as a reminder, we will put the presentation, the recording into it'll be on our website. If you look under the YouTube section, you'll be able to rewatch it. Okay, 90s trend, here to stay, or is it just visiting? Regarding handbags.
Yeah. Okay, I would say with the 90s trend in general, I think we have a little bit of time, and it's not just the 90s part of it, but it's this idea of nostalgia is really resonating with people. So it's either, you know, I say the Gen Z that has never experienced it before, so it's new to them, it feels really novel, and it feels really fun, and maybe a little bit of it's just what's the word, like there's nothing serious about it, it's just for fun, so it feels good to them for that reason. It feels nostalgic to people that already lived through it. And then I think in terms of the bags, when I think about, and someone's saying Y2K as well, yeah, for sure, it's all of that is happening, and I think that it continues to move forward. And if we go back on the spring 22 presentations, we talked about details like really nostalgic charms, tons of smiley faces, tons of you know, sort of colorful beads and plastics and things like that we saw through the 90s and Y2K. And I think it's just about that feeling good. So I think that we have a couple of seasons that we might see details of that carrying forward, because we need that sense of optimism. We need that sense of joy. And maybe it's good for what it is. But I do think that if we do have those trends and participate in those trends, we don't want them to be as fast fashion. We have to figure out a way to do them in a sustainable way.
Right. All right. So why make a note, everyone, you're going to want to look at our newsletters, because we will shortly work with Jessica to schedule a date to talk about the items that follow up on this trend. So it's a great part to the presentation. Again, accessoriescouncil.org. There's one more question squeezing in here from the previous trends. Which forecast converts successfully in sales and acceptance?
So I would say that there are going to be commercial ways to address any of the trends that are here. We've also been really mindful in the other forecasts to say, these are the evergreen items. They are the ones that are building the foundation. So when we're thinking about these 3 trends specifically, they're really that top of the pyramid. They're not meant to be the entirety of the collection. We want to focus on our staples. I would say that there's a crossover between all of them. I think that the great outdoors trend really makes sense for cold weather accessories, because we need ideas for vests, we need ideas for the crocheted sort of cold weather accessories. And then I think for jewelry, the royalty trend is going to be the most directional. And then for footwear and for sock styling and for all of the other parts of the uniform that aren't ready to wear, we should be looking at the school. And I also think that the school days will be very directional for handbags.
Great. Jessica, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We will see you soon.
Yes.
And for everyone watching, stay tuned. We're going to take a 5-minute stretch. We have an amazing opportunity coming up in the next session. And it's all about finance. And you're going to have a chance to ask questions about not just your business finance, but your personal finance. We have some polls in this section. And so we need you to take a stretch, grab a water, and we will be back and start right at 1 o'clock. Thank you, Jessica, and I'll see you all back here in 5 minutes. Since I have both of you on, we are talking to the lovely Jane Newton and Mike Pappachristou. How do I do with that?
Nailed it.
Well, I looked at that last name. I'm like, I am going to get that last name. But they are with RegentAtlantic. It is a group who advises individuals, families on all aspects of their finances. It is one of the largest independent advisory firms in the United States, helps with financial planning, investment management. At the end of the day, they're there to get their clients where they need to go, setting goals and helping you figure out how to get to them. So I thank you both for your time today. I know how busy you are. And I will turn the screen over to you. Again, questions, because we will have time for questions in this session. Put them into the chat, put them into the comments. You can send them to me individually if you want to, be anonymous with it. And we will, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Let me stop sharing my screen and off.
Sure. I'll bring up mine now, Karen. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right, Jane.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Karen. And also to my dear friend, Monica Rich-Kosan, who suggested that we speak at your business workshop. Mike and I are just delighted to have the opportunity to speak with the Accessories Council. Thank you all for coming on today to discuss a topic that's near and dear to us, financial fitness. We wanted to just take a moment to start with a bit about RegentAtlantic and what we're known for. As Karen said, we're one of the largest independent advisory firms in the country. We are owned by our employees, and that independence allows us to be squarely focused on our clients, individuals, and families. And as a fiduciary, the client comes first and always has for the almost 40 years that RegentAtlantic has been in existence. We don't sell anything or earn commissions. So like if you ask us a question about insurance, we don't sell insurance, but we advise on the whole. And that puts us on the same side of the table as our clients. So being a fiduciary in today's world is how we've always structured our business. And lastly, but not least, is our expertise. The very deep and broad bench that we have in-house allows us to collaborate across the almost 70 of us around the firm to bring the best to each of our clients. So our mission is to partner with our clients for financial well-being by tying together all the different pieces of a client's life, and we'll touch on quite a few today, but tying together both the financial planning and the investment management to make sure that we do the best for you and your family across generations. So to us, wealth management really is 9 different pillars, spanning the range of topics that we address for clients. So today you'll notice, I'm not going to read through all of these, you can see them on the screen, but today you will hear one overarching theme, which is it's not just about the dollars and cents. If all Mike and I did all day long was manage money and look at the numbers, frankly, I don't think either of us would be nearly as passionate about our jobs as we are. It is really about the emotional aspects of money, very different for each client and sometimes for a couple. And it's really about what's most important to that person, their values, their goals. So you'll hear us talk a little bit about not just the quantitative side of things today. We also know there's a broad audience on this call. Some of you are business owners, others are corporate execs. You're at different stages of your life from all the background that Karen was so nice to give to us. And so for today, we chose 3 themes that we hope will resonate with the most of you. And the 3 themes are about the importance of prioritizing your cash flows, potential tax planning strategies that you may want to consider, and how to best position your portfolio for the road ahead. As Karen said, we will leave time at the end for questions. Please feel free to submit them. And I think it's through the chat feature, Karen said.
The chat works, or you can put it in Q&A, either way.
Okay, lots of flexibility here. So please do submit your questions and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can at the end. So Mike.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, and I wanted to start today by taking a little sneak peek into the minds of the audience with a poll question. So Karen, are you able to launch that poll question for us?
You got it. Here it goes.
Thank you. And so the question you'll see that just popped up on the screen here is, what is the biggest financial challenge that you're facing? So I'll give everyone a couple seconds to look through the choices there and respond. But maybe while you're doing that, just one interesting point that Jane and I have really noticed over the last year and a half is that people are reprioritizing what's important to them. I think that's something that's always happened, but obviously given the world that we've lived in for the last year and a half, it's really accelerated that reprioritization. And it's something that will consistently happen. So, as you think through some of the responses here today, you fall into that bucket. Maybe you have reprioritized what's important to you. If not, maybe it's something that you're looking to do going forward. So Karen, I don't know if we're getting some responses trickling in still, but I'll.
We are. Can you see them popping up?
No, not yet.
Okay, let me see if I end it, if the responses will come. Should we give everybody another minute or two? We've got about 50%.
I would do about 10 seconds.
Okay.
To save time on the biggest financial challenge you're facing.
All right, here you go. It's close. Let's see.
Uh-oh.
There's your results.
Great. Wow. And actually, this is a pretty broad range of answers, which is exciting to see. I mean, Jane and I talk to people all the time who have all of these challenges and then some. But when I look at the top 2 finishers here, so retirement and increasing savings, I think those are probably the 2 most common areas that we find people come to us concerned about. And so, I thank everyone for participating there and allowing us to get a pulse on what's on your minds. And so when I think about our theme, our overarching theme for today, how do you make this year different for you? I think we already started off on the right foot. I think identifying that financial challenge is a great first step, because what it allows you to do is start to build a plan to directly address that challenge that you're facing. And so, sorry, my screen froze here. And so we all know how important it is to have a plan in place, right? I think many of you on this call today had a plan in place for your business over the last year and a half. And that should have allowed you to adapt, to survive and thrive in navigating through all the challenges that we've been facing. And so really what we want to do today is take that concept of having a plan for your business and apply it to your personal life, and more specifically, your personal financial life. And I think one other thing to note here is that, there are plenty of components that make up your financial life. The key is really finding the magic that brings them all together in order to achieve your long-term financial goals. And I think one other point too is no two puzzles are going to look the same, right? Your puzzle may look very different than your closest friends or colleagues because it might have different pieces, or the size of the pieces may vary depending on what's most important to you. So again, at the end of the day, it's finding and constructing a plan that works for you. And so what we're going to do now is just take a deeper dive into 3 of these specific puzzle pieces. So first, look at education savings. And I think the first question that I tend to get from either parents or grandparents who are looking to fund their children's education is, how do I do it? And one of the most common vehicles we see is the use of 529 college savings plans. And so what these plans are accounts that you open and fund with contributions. That money is invested and grows tax-free. And then when distributions are taken from the account to fund education expenses, those distributions are tax-free as well. And so any individual is able to gift up to $15,000 per year to a 529 account for their beneficiaries. But there's one special rule that applies to 529 accounts that allows you to front load contributions and really supercharge the power of the account. And so what that calls for is it allows you to make 5 years worth of those contributions to a 529 account up front. So let's look at a couple who wants to fund education for their one child. As a couple, they're able to contribute $30,000 a year, again, 15 per spouse, and multiply that by the 5-year special exception rule, which allows them to put $150,000 into a 529 plan right off the bat. And so people that are able to afford that should really consider exploring that option. Second, there are people who are just going to be in their peak earning years when their kids are off to college. And so in thinking through that, it might just make sense for them to pay tuition out of their cash flow. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, at the end of the day, it's finding out what plan is right for you. And to that point, I think values play a really important role here too. What we see, Jane and I have talked to many clients about education funding, and we see different views across the board. There are some clients or some individuals out there who want to fully fund their kids' education because they understand the burden that having student loans has on young adults. On the flip side, there are parents who want their kids to have skin in the game. They see value in having young adults take on debt because they think that it allows them to really appreciate the value of a dollar. And so again, it's just balancing your values with what you can afford to do. Speaking of debt, so paying down debt is another financial piece. And this is one that I personally love talking to clients about, or people in general. I mean, so much so that I did an entire podcast episode on it, but that's just me being a bit of a nerd. So what I tend to see is there are really 3 drivers behind the way people think about debt. And the first is emotion. I think historically, many people have been taught to just work, save money, and pay off debt. There are a lot of bad 4-letter words in the world. People think debt is one of them. And so having that mentality throughout your life leads you to think that maybe paying off debt is the right approach. Secondly, where you are in your life may dictate the way you view the debt that you have. So for instance, let's look at someone who's approaching or potentially in retirement. The idea of having this large debt balance looming above your head and the idea of losing your paycheck or not having as stable of income as you once had is frightening, and rightfully so. To Jane's point earlier, right? Every financial decision we make has a qualitative piece and a quantitative piece. And so here, if people are entering retirement and they're going to lose sleep over the fact that they have this debt looming over their head, then paying it off might make sense. But at the end of the day, dollar and cents do matter too. And so it's up to Jane and I to really give the perspective to clients of, what is the best use for the dollars that I have? And today, best use for your dollar might not be paying down debt. I mean, Jane, I don't know when you bought your first home, but I assume interest rates were probably a little higher than they are today.
Just a wee bit higher. Interest rates were like 7% versus, 1 or 2% today. And we were thrilled to get a mortgage at 8 7/8%. Woohoo! Nobody would go for that today. We're
Exactly.
Hey, Mike, 3 or 4?
Yeah. I think four's probably looking a little expensive, but to that point, Jane, we're in a different world today. And so when you think about the best use of your money, one way to look at it is, can I earn a higher return in my investment portfolio than the interest rate on my debt? And if the answer is yes, then from a numbers standpoint, it probably makes sense to keep that money invested and hold on to the debt. Again, at the end of the day, it's balancing that comfort level with the numbers.
Hey, Mike, the session before us, as Karen shared, was all about trends, maybe a little bit more exciting than some of these trends to those on the call. One of the trends that I've seen, and you and I've talked about this, is it's people who don't ever expect to carry debt as they're heading into retirement, or maybe even by the time their kids are in college, they do not want to also carry debt while they're paying for college. All sorts. With interest rates so low, how many of our clients have taken on debt when they went to buy another home, even during the pandemic, who never imagined taking on another financing like that? So that's another interesting trend with rates so low and portfolios doing fairly well. There is that arbitrage that some clients are willing to play, and then there's others who just don't want to see that fix, not in their later years.
Exactly. And so the third component that I wanted to talk about, and the third and final component here, is savings. And if there's one takeaway that I want people to have today, I think I'm gonna maybe steal some thunder from you, Jane, but it's to come up with and implement a disciplined saving strategy. And so what does that mean? To me, what that means is figuring out an amount and a frequency that you can save on a consistent basis. And I think the best way to implement that is by setting up an automatic contribution from, say, an account to a brokerage account. And, you can do that on a monthly basis. What I personally do is I have my automatic contributions hit my account every time a paycheck comes in. That way, I don't even have to think about it. And by the same token, I don't get used to seeing that money in my checking account to spend, right? I pay myself first, and then I'm able to allocate the rest of those dollars to my other puzzle pieces per what's important to me. Once you have that disciplined saving strategy in place, you can start to prioritize your savings based on your goals. And so I think everyone on this call today probably wants to retire at some point. And even if it's not retire, have some sense of financial independence. And so for those who can afford to do it, I think maximizing retirement plan contributions is the way to go. That's going to help you achieve your long-term savings goals. But we do know that life comes at us, and there's plenty to think about, plenty you need to pay for before retirement even comes into play, right? Whether it's buying a house or paying for vacations, you need to think about the time horizon in which you'll need those funds. So for those more short to intermediate term needs, you're not going to want to tap your retirement accounts for that. You're going to want a separate brokerage account that's maybe even invested a little more conservatively, knowing that you're going to need those dollars in the near term. And I think one important piece, and this is something I encourage most people I talk to do, is building up an emergency fund or a rainy day fund. I think that's been really important, especially in light of what's happened over the last year and a half, where many people either were out of work or didn't have the same earnings potential that they had previously, and were forced to actually draw down their savings to live on. And so having an emergency fund of maybe 6 months to a year's worth of expenses just sitting in cash is, could be beneficial if something were to go wrong. And finally, once you have those plans in place, it's a matter of how do you look at, or how do you invest in different types of accounts? So you have your pre-tax accounts, Roth accounts, and your taxable accounts. But I know Jane's going to touch on that a little more in her section next. So I'll leave that for her.
Hey, Karen, you did such a good job of the first poll question. Can I ask you to put the other poll question up now, please? Karen? All right, well, we'll move.
I was on mute.
Sorry, Karen.
I was talking away on mute. So the next poll is coming up. I have to just get rid of the first one. This is the first time that we're doing polls. So hang with it for just 1 second. There we go. Here it is.
You're awesome, because everybody wants to know what everybody else is thinking or doing. Do you think income tax rates will be higher, lower, or stay the same next year? If you would please just make a choice. Income tax rates next year, higher, lower, or stay the same?
I know what I want the answer to be.
It's not what we want. Let's see where people fall. Karen, I'm assuming the response
Ready?
coming fast. Yes, we're ready.
Okay, here's the results.
So 3/4 of you think rates will be higher, and some think the same, some think lower. Thank you so much, Karen. Well, that kind of fuels right into what we're going to talk about next, which is potential income tax changes. So look, income taxes today are at historical lows. The top tax rate, what a high earner, perhaps like some of you on this call pays, is 40.6%. I know that's painful, but that's, looking back over decades, a rather low tax bite that we all have to pay. But this era is ending in 2026 when the current tax law sunsets. And that means if Congress doesn't act sooner, the top rate will jump to 43.4%. So there are lots of proposals to increase taxes that have already been presented and could happen sooner. But it's anyone's guess what Congress might actually enact, as there's quite a bit on Congress's plate these days. So when might they change the tax law? Could it be this year? Could it be next year? The year after? I would just like to stress how important it is, especially now, to assess your wealth through a tax lens. So for example, in April, the Biden administration introduced the American Families Plan, which, as you may know, is largely funded by taxes on high earners. So the key thing to focus on in that plan as an investor is the tax on long-term capital gains. The tax that you pay if you sell a stock, a mutual fund, even your business, some investment that you sell at a gain. It's gone up in value. Under the Biden plan, the long-term capital gains rate would basically double to be the same rate as your ordinary income tax rate, what you pay on your wages. For those earning over $1 million, this has huge implications because the rate on those gains jumps from 23.8 today to 43.4%. Now you can roll your eyes and say $1 million more in earnings, I'm not there. For those who are earning at least $400,000 up to $1 million, the rate on those capital gains will stay the same under this plan, but the rate on your ordinary income is going to jump to 43.4%. We know that what actually might get enacted could be quite different or nothing at all. But we also know that in less than 5 years, 4.5 or so, less than 4.5, rates are definitely going to go up. So our view and the way we think about it with clients, especially given the time of year we're in, is that they would do well to consider strategies to reduce their tax bite. So we thought you'd be interested in some of the strategies we're discussing with clients, so you can think about which ones might help you as well. Retirement plan funding, charitable giving, accelerating income, and managing your portfolio tax efficiently. So let's start with retirement plan funding. I'm assuming that many of you have 401k plans at work. Perhaps if you don't, you have other kinds of plans, IRAs and other similar plans, or your own 401k. All those contributions you've made to your retirement plans are great. And as Mike has said, you want to be very disciplined in your saving, and retirement plan funding is one of the most disciplined ways to accumulate assets for retirement. But it's really important to know that if you contributed your dollars pre-tax, you don't own all of the money that you see in your accounts. When you start taking your money out, usually age 72, the government is going to take its cut. So you actually own only about 60% of what is in your retirement plan account today. And when the money is taken out, it's taxed at your ordinary income rate, the highest rate. You don't get the benefit of these long-term capital gains rates. So keep saving for retirement. But as we always ask ourselves at Regent Atlantic, is there a better way? And yes, there may be for you. If your plan offers your 401k plan offers a Roth option, that may be a better way to steer your contributions. Many employees have made this decision. I mean, we at Regent Atlantic put in a Roth flavor, I don't know, at least 10, maybe 15 years ago, because we as employees demanded it. Many more companies are offering a Roth option. What happens if you put your money into a Roth is you're contributing after tax dollars. You've already paid the taxes on those. So you lose the benefit of that tax deduction of the contributions you've been making in other ways. But your money grows tax-free and it comes out tax-free down the road. Even more important, perhaps for you like our clients, is under today's rules, you don't have to take distributions from money that's in a Roth account. So imagine way down the road, and some of you are already planning, hopefully, for retirement. From 29% of you said your challenge is to retire. Imagine way down the road, you don't need all those required minimum distributions that you would have to take that also increase your income and your income taxes in retirement. If instead you could keep all that money in the Roth side of the ledger, right, and let it grow tax-free forever. Having Roth assets is a great way to balance the pre-tax dollars you have otherwise in IRAs, in a regular traditional 401k. And with a healthy mix of both pre and post-tax dollars in your retirement plans, you'll have much more flexibility when the time comes to generate income for your lifestyle in retirement. So one of the things that Mike and I focus always on with our clients is not only to make sure they're financially secure, but they have the flexibility to have options down the road. And having different kind of assets in your retirement plans gives you more options. It's not for everyone. So we'll talk a little bit about this.
And Jane, I think when I think about it, it seems a little odd that people would want to pay taxes today, right? If they're making money today, they're probably not making as much money when they're retired. Why would they want the Roth option?
Well, that's a great point that comes up a lot. There is and I will call it a myth among many people, that by the time they're in retirement, they'll be in a really low tax bracket. They may be, but for most people with a fairly high, who've worked hard to accumulate assets and have kind of a higher net worth, it's absolutely not going to be the case. They have pensions, perhaps if they're lucky. They may have pension income, all pre-tax. Social Security income, much of which is taxed if you earn a decent amount of money. And all those required distributions from someone's 401k. If you think about that just as a base for generating taxable income in retirement, very few people, with a decent net worth are in a very low bracket at retirement. And it's not unusual for our clients to stay in the 40% bracket. Every dollar that comes out of their retirement plans is taxed at, let's say, today's 40%. So it's important to look ahead. And then also you have to ask yourself, by the time I retire and take all this money out in 5 years, in 20 years, are rates generally going to be as low as they are today? And even most of you on the call think they're going up. So it's important to assess what you can do now to fund different kind of tax buckets so that you have more options to save money on taxes when you're in retirement. And you don't have a lot of years to do that, right? You want to take advantage of the years you can. And we'll talk about one of those strategies in a minute. Thank you, Mike, for raising that. So it's generally a myth that you're going to be in like a super low tax bracket in retirement. You could be, but most of the people we work with are not. The second tax planning strategy is around charitable giving. Now, I know only say 5% of you say charitable or family gifting is on your minds right now is the #1 priority. But I would say that generally speaking, we have seen a huge increase in giving to charitable organizations during the pandemic. And I think that's wonderful. When you make your gifts to charity, do you just give cash or write a check? That's great if you do, but once again, we ask ourselves, is there a better way to make that gift? And we're talking about better way from a tax angle. So what about if you could give your appreciated stocks instead? So many of you as investors have stocks that have taken off, in the last year or so, if not longer. And you've got stocks and mutual funds that have greatly increased in value. If you sell those yourself, you pay capital gains tax on those and only keep what you net after tax. If instead you gifted those stocks or mutual funds to the charity you want to benefit, the charity sells them right away. They want the cash. So you gift your Tesla shares that have grown in value so wonderfully, or your Zoom shares to make a corollary to today. And the charity is going to sell them and get the same amount of money that you were giving them anyway. And you didn't have to sell them and pay the taxes. So, and you still get the same charitable deductions. So everybody comes out ahead.
Jane, I think there's an even better way though, isn't there?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. If instead of giving the stock directly to charity, you could open what's called a donor advised fund and contribute those appreciated securities directly to your donor advised fund. Your donor advised fund acts like a charitable checking account. You put the money in and you can decide how to distribute it out over any period of time. It doesn't all have to go out right away, but you get the tax deduction when you fund it. So what's attractive about this is you could front load a few years worth of your gifts. Maybe you give $5,000 a year to charity, you could put $25,000 worth of appreciated securities into your fund today. You could put $250,000 in if you wanted to, and not contribute again, but distribute it out over time. But you get the tax deduction in the year when you really want it. That might be this year if your income is super high. It might be next year, maybe when tax rates go up or you have a higher income. But a donor advised fund is a great strategy for those who do have intent to give to charity over a period of time. So let's move to the accelerating income bullet. This is a bit counterintuitive. Why would I push more income into this year? Well, you might do it if you, like many of us on this call, think that tax rates are likely to go up next year. So what if you could do a Roth conversion, a Roth IRA conversion, and generate more income this year? What if you could, if you were selling your business, push it into this year when rates are not going to be higher than next year? Or maybe you have some flexibility to accelerate your income or some bonus into this year. Those are all ways to take advantage of this year's low tax rates. And I think the most important thing is you want to have a multi-year tax planning strategy. You want to look at, what if I did this strategy to accelerate income, or maybe even accelerate your deductions this year? What if I did more of that this year, or am I going to get a bigger bang for my tax buck next year? So it's all about looking across different tax years. And here we are in August, there's not that much more of this year left. Sometimes it makes sense to do it now. That's why we're having this call. And other times you could push it to next year. To us, the important thing, to Mike and me, is that you educate yourself on the strategies that may make sense for you specifically, and that you're nimble to be able to move. Because you want to keep an eye on what's going on in Washington that allows you to be really tax efficient in your life. And the last strategy is managing your portfolio tax efficiently so that you keep more of what you earn. Mike will touch on this in a second, a little bit more, but maybe you have many different types of accounts like our clients do. You might have a taxable brokerage account. You might have an IRA that's pre-tax. You might have a Roth or a regular 401k. You want to take advantage of the different tax characteristics of those accounts. What often happens is investors hold the same exact securities across all their accounts, and they completely ignore the benefits tax-wise of certain accounts. So we call a better way asset location, buying specific securities and specific accounts in order to get the best results tax-wise at the end. So we want you to take advantage of that. And the higher that tax rates are, the more important asset location becomes. So I think the key point on these strategies is that income tax diversification gives you more flexibility and more control in retirement to fund your lifestyle and minimize taxes down the road. So to us, tax planning is all about adding another routine to your fitness program. And with that, let me turn it over to Mike for our third and last topic.
Thanks, Jane. And you just touched on tax location, tax diversification maybe, and want to talk a little bit about positioning your portfolio from an investment allocation or diversification standpoint. And so off the bat, let me just apologize to all of you with Design Eye here on the call, because I'm sure this clash of colors is just making you cringe. But I promise there's a little bit of logic to the chaos here. And so what I'd like you to do now is just pick a color and follow that color from the left to the right side of the table here. And what you'll notice is that there's no real rhyme or reason to how these different asset classes work, because that's essentially what you're looking at here. You're looking at the returns of different asset classes over the last 20 years. And so what it tells us is there's no pattern, there's no path to the way that different asset classes work. And ultimately what that means is it's important to have exposure to all of these or most of these in your portfolio in order to take advantage of the different ups and downs that asset classes experience. And so that concept is known as diversification. And that's something we've preached at RegentAtlantic for a very long time, probably forever. And I think, going one step beyond that is we need to be prepared to position our portfolios for more near-term events as well. And so one question that Jane and I know are getting quite often today is, how do I position my portfolio to protect against inflation? Inflation is a very real thing, and I'm sure many of you are witnessing this in your day-to-day operations in your business or company, right? A good that may have cost you $10 last year may cost you $12 or $13 this year. And so ultimately what that means is your dollars are becoming less valuable. And so we just really need to be aware of that when we're investing for the long term. And so how are we thinking about it? Equities as a whole have always served as a pretty good hedge against inflation, but there are certain sectors of the equity market that do a little better during inflationary periods. And I'm just going to switch slides for a second to illustrate this. So what you're looking at here are the earnings growth estimates or profit growth estimates for different sectors of the economy. And so all the way on the left here, you have the S&P 500, which is a collection of the 500 largest companies here in the US. And you can see that earnings growth this year is pretty promising. But if you break that down into further sectors, you'll see that cyclicals and financials are really outpacing or expected to outpace profit growth. And so you want to be sure to have exposure to these sectors of the market in your broader portfolio. On the fixed income side, so Jane, I know one question we get a lot is, with interest rates so low, why should I even hold bonds in my portfolio?
All the time.
All the time, exactly. And really the response in one word is protection. Bonds are there to provide cushion and stability when equity markets are volatile or go a little haywire. But we know that, or we expect interest rates to go up in the coming years. And when interest rates rise, bond prices tend to fall. So bond investors should be careful when investing in those markets. And so there are a few things to consider. So one, short-term bonds could play a role in portfolios because they're less sensitive to those rising interest rates. As interest rates rise, short-term bonds, the prices of those are expected to fall less. Also, since they're short-term in nature, once those bonds mature, you can reinvest the proceeds at higher interest rates. TIPS, or Treasury inflation protected securities, are government issued bonds that simply, whose values just rise at the rate of inflation. So that's a good way to protect purchasing power. And then finally, because interest rates have been so low for so long, it's forced bond investors to think outside the box. And so there are a number of strategies out there that offer relatively attractive yields, but aren't necessarily correlated to rising interest rates or rising inflation. And the third point here, you just see a bullet for inflation hedges. There are some investments out there that don't really fit neatly into the box of equities or fixed income, but can serve as inflation hedges nonetheless. And the first one that comes to mind for me is real estate. As inflation rises, we see landlords have the ability to dramatically increase, or not so dramatically, either way, increase their rents. And ultimately what that does is makes the properties that they own more valuable. And so just to wrap up this slide, I just want to emphasize one point, not necessarily saying go out there and only buy these sectors of the market, right? And this may come off as a little corny for this presentation, but think of these exposures as the accessories to your already diversified portfolio, right? You want to enhance the look of your portfolio based on what's currently going on in the market.
So Mike, it really comes back to go back to one of your very early points. It comes back to having a plan, in this case, an investment plan that is a breakdown of stocks and bonds and maybe other investments, we call them alternatives, but stocks and bonds that get you where you want to go. And if you're supposed to have an allocation to bonds and they're not very attractive, it's a matter of finding the right way. But with the stock market zooming up, bonds haven't been that attractive. Actually, pretty boring this past year or so. But you want them just when the market swoons, and to help you sleep at night and get you where you want to go. So I think that it's again about having the right mix for you. And what we spend our time on is figuring out what is the amount of risk a client needs to take and how much safety do they need. So I'm looking at the time and I want to move on to, I see some great questions coming in. I just want to close by saying that we're here to help. Are you on track to be as financially fit as you can be? When we think back to what some of your challenges are, we would be happy to have a free 30-minute consult with those of you who are interested in discussing the pillars, those 9 pillars, the pillars that are of specific interest to you. Feel free to reach out to Mike or me to make this year the year that's different for you. And with that, we'll take your questions.
Well, we have a couple good ones in there. And one of them asks about Bitcoins, that in any cryptocurrency. How does that factor into savings or investing these days?
Okay, Mike's the young one. I'm going to.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one, Jane. So, this is obviously something that's stolen the headlines over the last couple of years and quite frankly has made a lot of people a lot of money. But that being said, what we're looking to do is, and what people should be looking to do, is building a long-term investment plan that's diversified. And so when we think about how we select investments, there are ways to actually apply value to companies and logically, build them into the portfolio based on certain risk factors. Right now, crypto is at a very early stage. There's no real way to value it, and it's extremely risky, extremely volatile. And so at the end of the day, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not here saying that you can't make money off of it, but I wouldn't necessarily think of it as part of your long-term savings approach. I would think of that more as trying to hit the lottery or being speculative.
We may get there.
Yeah.
Bitcoin and these cryptos are becoming more and more mainstream. I think the one thing that has surprised a lot of people who have either invested in Bitcoin or maybe speculated in them is the tax implications. And now the government is regulating that you have to report these transactions. So for example, if you use Bitcoin to pay for your coffee at Starbucks, technically speaking, and I honestly do not know how the IRS is going to enforce this because it's so new, but technically speaking, you're supposed to report if your Bitcoin had a gain and you actually converted it in effect to cash to pay for your coffee. How are you going to do that? So I know a lot of people have gotten surprised. I'm sure you've read about it, and hopefully nobody on this call, when they actually sold their Bitcoin or went to use it, about forgetting to think about the tax implications. And by the way, if you hold something for less than 12 months, you get and sell it at a gain, you get stuck with short-term capital gains. It gets taxed at the highest rate, like your income, not that 23.8%. So you want to be really careful. There is a great question. Can you talk about contributions to your church? Any charity that is organized as a tax-exempt 501c3 entity. So 501c3 is a section of the code. Any charity that's organized as a 501c3 entity can qualify for your contributions and for you to qualify to get a deduction. So, if your church or house of worship is set up that way, once in a while, they're just something small. But many of them will accept appreciated securities. It's just transferring, shares of XYZ over to the church's brokerage account. And then the charity takes it from there and gets the same benefit that you had intended. So if you're not sure about what you're able to do, you should call or get online with your house of worship and figure out what's possible for you. But those should qualify for charitable deductions. And if they accept appreciated securities, a much better way to do it.
Great. So your offer to have a one-on-one consultation is so very generous. Do you want to pop that screen up again so everybody might be able to grab a picture of it? I see your emails on the bottom. And of course, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to direct you to Mike or Jane if you're interested in more information. I know there were more questions and we're out of time. So it's a great chance to accept that lovely offer and talk to them directly. Thank you so much. I have been taking notes and learning things along the way, and you made me rethink a few things that I have in my own personal strategy. So I might be one of those calls.
We love it. I think I just want to leave all of you with the question of what are you going to do to make this the year that's different for you so that you don't find yourself in the same place a year from now. And we know how quickly time passes. We know everybody on this call is busy, so we're going to let you go. But we also know that inertia is actually a choice as well. And many, many people let these things go. And then there's a wake-up call, and that's when they reach out to us. So if we can help any of you, we'd be delighted to hear from you. And Karen, we both want to say thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Time with your accessories council.
Pleasure. Thanks again for having us. So everyone stay tuned. We have two great speakers on deck and I get to introduce them right now. Hopefully with my screen here. Anybody who knows me well knows that I am not a technology guru. So the fact that this worked, I'm super excited about. Our next speakers, we have Rachael Grachowski and Valentina Di Donato. Rachael I am very excited. We were able to feature a story on her in the last issue of Accessories Magazine. So if you go to accessoriescouncil.org and you click on the magazine, you can read the story and see some of her beautiful work and learn a little bit more there. And Valentina, you may recognize her face, but you certainly are going to recognize her work at Forbes and CNN, and she's a strong advocate. I got to look at some of her writing for women, and we're delighted to have both of you here today.
Well, thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, if you want to put any questions that you have along the way, you can put them in the chat, you can put them into the comments, and I will make sure that we get to them by the end of the session. And again, Rachael, award-winning founder of architectural firm that you started. You're based in Montclair, and we are excited to have you. We got to feature you a little bit in the magazine, but you do retail spaces, commercial spaces, residential spaces, and certainly what the last year has taught us is that we might need to be rethinking our spaces. So I cannot wait to hear all of your thoughts.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Rachael, I'm so excited to be able to speak with you again after our last conversation, especially now in the time of the pandemic. We're still in it. It's starting to feel like a little bit more normal, but I think we're still in it, unfortunately. But through the lens of architecture and design, so much has happened. You know, we've all been at home. We've all needed and wanted to remodel to sort of find a sense of normalcy in our homes where we're working, where we're doing school, where we're also trying to live and find peace. What have you noticed from the beginning to now in terms of the evolution of architecture and design in this unprecedented time?
Yeah, thanks, Valentina, for the question. It's great to be here with you. So, you know, we've been very busy, obviously, through this whole time, really within about a month of the beginning of the pandemic. And so initially, what we saw was a lot of people who really wanted to increase the amount of space that they had significantly. So, you know, all of a sudden you had your whole family there at one time. And so literally like 50 to 80% increase in square footage was what we were getting calls on. But in all honesty, like the objective was not always the need for new space. It was the understanding of how to better utilize the space that people already had. Because many of us, maybe not if you're living in the city in an apartment, but if you're living in a single family home, the likelihood that you have underutilized space is pretty high. Or maybe it's just full of things that you could let go of, that you could use better, right? And so the other part was not just the idea of more space, but also creating space where people could connect with their family members or really just, again, find some peace, some calm, returning to yourself. What we started to see over time is that, you know, there was a little bit more ease between the functionality of the family, and maybe not everybody needed their own separate room. But more interestingly was what we saw happen in the commercial market, which was that after sort of the first peak started to come down, a lot of entrepreneurs were really starting to think about, like, what is the next thing? What are we going to do after this? And so there was this wellness, this infusion of wellness, whether it was in spas or, you know, even, you know, one of our clients who is a superfood, vegan, organic, fast casual restaurant, like it ticks all the marks, right? And it's just really exciting to see.
That's amazing. That really leads into what I was going to ask you next. In terms of, you know, now we're at a different space in the pandemic, and some people feel it's time to bring some people back to the workplace. What are you seeing, and what are you also advising to your clients in sort of the more commercial space on how to make people feel comfortable in the return to the office?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's the, I guess, givens like creating more distance between employees and divisions between desks, as well as, updating HVAC systems. But that's kind of like the old story. The new story, as far as I'm concerned, is, creating spaces in your office where you can have like quiet time, whether it's a meditation space or the way in which the cafeteria or the lunchroom is set up, or maybe it's even an office that you can a private office that you can book time at. Also, ideas like bringing plants and flowers into the office environment on a regular basis, because, we all know that, whether we're good with plants or not, like it actually does calm us, it reminds us of nature. So those are some of the key elements that I'm focused on right now.
Oh, absolutely. And would you say that there are concrete design changes that you advise now to clients that are coming to you for advice?
Yeah, I mean, we have a client, Universal Yums, who we're just finishing their corporate offices, and they're a company that is like a subscription snack company. So they introduce you to an experience through snacks. And so they already had this really interesting business model. And because of the pandemic, of course, they've grown tremendously. It's a perfect thing when you're stuck at home. And when we started that project, we really started thinking about the concrete things that might affect an office environment in particular. So we really wanted to bring in the idea of home, of a little bit of a residential vibe to that commercial space. So we did things like the office chairs have a little bit more of a residential sort of dining room style. It's still flexible, it's still on casters, still has support that you would need in an office environment, but gives you that more relaxed feeling. We also did things like for the carpet in the offices, it looks very much like a sisal. So that it just again has that sort of more organic vibe, this idea that you're sitting in your living room. And then we actually have a room, it's a collaboration room that's called the living room, and it's set up that way. So again, people sort of relax, and it's like, it's not this jarring experience going back into the office where, there's a lot of discomfort that we have to address.
Absolutely. And I'm sure even in terms for like the people that are our friends on the chat that we're on right now, who own shops and have boutiques, even for the clients that come in, to make them feel comfortable. You have such a great design ethos that I'm sure there's intentional thinking behind that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of elements that come into this idea of welcoming and creating a peaceful environment as people come back to these spaces. And I think my primary focus has really always been on bringing the nature in. And we talked about that a little bit, but I think in retail and hospitality, it's the same thing. So it's when you bring in wood that the grains are expressed. And it's not necessarily sleek, but it's this reminder of all of the years, the time that it's taken nature to produce this product that we now have the honor to actually use. It's the lifespan of nature, or it's the stone that you get to see, through the movement of the texture. You're seeing the elements as they have condensed over time, or the woven elements, woven fibers that might be on the wall cover. But it's really also this idea that, in order to effectively use those elements, you have to have a balance between what is seen and what is not seen. And so I often look at it as either the backdrop is very simple and then the details can shine, or the backdrop is kind of a little noisy and the details are so simple that your eye goes to them. It's like, you know, one or the other.
Do you think that we're on the precipice of an actual design shift in style because of the pandemic?
I mean, you know, I'm seeing it actually. I mean, as you can imagine, I consume a tremendous amount of design content. And but what's interesting, so what I'm seeing already is almost this, they're peaceful textures and shapes that are coming together in, it's almost a very primitive format. And so because of that, like, I think that's the design aesthetic change that we're going to come to. And I'm seeing in particular a lot of this coming out of Europe, where the floors are white, the walls are white, you know, everything's plaster. In fact, we just finished a residential project like this, just a bathroom, but it was like the whole thing was plaster. We just don't do that.
Sneak peeks on social media. I'm very excited to see more of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it is just this, like, I think about primitive forms and textures a lot because I think it's intuitive to us. Like, this is it's in our DNA, right? These are things that are familiar to us, but we don't necessarily know that until you see it, right? And we overcomplicate things often because, I mean, I guess that's just our nature as humans.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. But it's interesting to see that perhaps we'll move away from synthetic materials. Perhaps we'll move away from things that are not sustainable or ethical, because now, through the pandemic, I think maybe a silver lining in this moment within the design lens is that everything has to be curated and selected carefully, because everything has potential impact on the environment.
Yeah, I think the other piece to that, like, just to sort of muse on what you're talking about, is that through the pandemic, there's a realization or a remembrance, at least for me, on what it means to create. So when you're creating fixtures for a store or furniture for a home, you know, there's a lot of creativity and passion and you know, love that goes into creating these elements. And so I think that there may be also a change in finding more makers who are creating even on a corporate level, because and that is sustainability, right? Like, that in and of itself has many layers of sustainability.
Absolutely. And what's interesting about this time period, where we've all had the luxury of time to sort of reflect and sort of rethink how we live and how we consume, this could really potentially be a market shift, which will essentially create a shift in the products available. That's exciting, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah. So I know, you know, you've always, in interviews, I've heard you speak on the intentionality of consuming, but also of the importance of creating calm for your clients. How can we achieve that in our homes and in our workplaces? And do you have examples and projects you've worked on?
Yeah, I mean, first, for me, intentional living or design is really about being in the awareness of the experience, the space, the environment, that you're in. And so the invitation is that people, clients, users attempt to allow themselves into that space, because when you're in that space, you are much more focused on gratitude than lack. And so overall, you have more joy, right? That can happen wherever you are. Again, that can be retail, hospitality, residential. And so creating calm, I think, is and creating spaces where you can be in intentional living is, again, we've talked a little bit about the balance, the play of textures and nature, but it's also creating the spaces where you can actually return to yourself. So in residential, you and I talked a little bit about this before, where, the idea that maybe you would have a reading nook or a reading room. And it's that space that if that's what resonates with you, you can be in this space and contemplate, I guess many things. Obviously, it might also be a meditation room, or it might be a yoga space, might even be your kitchen, but it's how you ritualize the kitchen. And we've had lots of conversations about creating within our team about that the kitchen, although for many people it's just a kitchen, it's really the space that you feed your family, right? And I think when we go to commercial projects, there's also, again, this ability to create these spaces through intentional design, through the materials, through the balance. It's the language that you're speaking without speaking it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that in our last conversation, prior to the article for Forbes, I loved being able to hear from your design point of view as an architect, as a historian, how the needs of people have changed, especially during this time. And so to carve out a nook that has a spiritual resonance is meaningful and important. It's funny when you compare a home, how they were built maybe in the 50s, it's, the living room, the dining room, because that it was conducive to a certain type of life, but maybe life is changing and our needs are changing too. What would you say to that?
Well, I think for sure that's true. I think, and I think this applies both to homes and offices. Like and the pandemic has even spun this further, right? Like, I think that organization is something that we've always needed, but even more so now. And again, this sort of tips back to the creating calm, but it also applies to like how we live now, right? Like our lives are so fast and we have so much stuff. I heard a quote or read a quote the other day that was something like, our clutter are postponed decisions. And I thought, oh, that is just so right on. And so if we can create systems in our lives for organization, whether it's like 15 minutes a day, and then having, whether it's the file drawer in the kitchen or it's the desk organizer, so that we don't even have to think about it. It's just done. Because when we arrive at the workplace and our desk is piled high, like with papers crossing over each other, you don't really know what to do first.
Right.
But when it's all, even if it's just like straight piles across your desk in an relatively organized fashion, you sit down and you're like, oh, I can actually start my day. And so I think that's one thing about the way we live today that we actually, need to be mindful of. I think the other thing is, and this, again, I think this is a work environment thing that's come out of the pandemic, is the culture. So I think the way we live today is, we've realized how much we need community.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we need to start to organize our lives around community. And in the work environment, we have to participate in that. So whether that's the way we have meetings, what type of table we have in the conference room, maybe it should be round. Maybe we should stop with these rectangular tables, right? Like
Right.
maybe that doesn't support community. Maybe that's, doesn't really work anymore. And even understanding boundaries. I think more than ever, we see the many, many roles that many of us play in life, and honoring that respecting that. So that can happen through design, but it also happens through culture.
Absolutely. So yeah, it sounds like we're, really maybe in a bit of a renaissance for design. A big shift might be happening, it sounds like, which is exciting. What would you say are the projects you're most excited about right now? I mean, there's so much happening for you. I should also say, just driving throughout Montclair, I can always spot your designs now. It's like incredible.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It has been a very exciting time. We're really lucky in the projects that we get to participate in. One of the projects I'm super excited about right now is Montclair Film. We are working on a new, well, it's an existing theater that we're renovating. It's a six screen cinema. And we worked with Montclair Film, which was founded as a film festival by Stephen and Evie Colbert and Bob Feinberg. And we did their brick and mortar location in 2015, their first location, which is now their administration and their education center. So we've had a relationship with them and kind of understand the brand and where they're going to go. And Tom Hall, the director, when he realized that this theater was open and it's directly across the street of their existing location, just dove into the vision of what could be created in this space. And why I'm so excited about it is that it's about community. And ultimately, the community projects are what I feel most passionate about. And it's not even only like projects in my community, in this community, it's projects that sustain and build and encourage community. So I'm excited about that one. We have another one that is very interesting as well. They're cannabis dispensaries, and we have done about 5 of them and 1 grow center. And those are exciting because they are on the precipice of, I think, in their own evolution. Like, it's an evolution that they even exist, right? But the states that it's been legalized for a long time, like, they have to continue to navigate and evolve. And so what's happening, each store has something new that's more experiential than the last. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's smart technology, maybe it's music, maybe it's video content, maybe it's lifestyle. Like, they're becoming lifestyle brands. And so what's right now, the conversation is that it's, food, it's music, it's wellness, movement, and they're starting to do festivals and things like that. So it's really interesting to be on the forefront of an industry that people are, depending where you live, some people are just starting to understand it or try to understand it. But, we've already been in it for a number of years, 5 or 6 years, where we've gotten to see such a tremendous amount of evolution already.
Absolutely. And how do you say you go about, what's your process like to deal with a relatively new way of sort of selling a product that has existed for obviously years and years? How do you do that to make it feel accessible, approachable, since it was recently legalized?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think sometimes it's very brand specific, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it depends on who your clientele is, because with some brands, they, just as an example, we might design so that you have a one-on-one relationship between yourself as the user, as the retail client, and the retailer. So it's one-on-one. And then there are other environments which are a little bit more savvy, where there's a lot of technology involved, but that changes the layout and it changes the aesthetic, because, just like a very high-end retail store, some people aren't going to feel comfortable going into that outlet, or just like the corner dispensary that maybe is an old gas station. Not everybody's going to feel comfortable going in there. Right. So you have to know who your client is.
Sure. And design with that in mind.
Absolutely. Whether it's materials, it's the layout, there's a lot of difficult, there's a lot of regulation also involved in dispensaries. For me, I always look at it, and I feel like I do this with all retail, like that everything is precious, right? And so the way it's presented and the way that the communication is, the education around it is an invitation, and so that the clients actually get what they need.
So exciting. So exciting. And yeah, it's funny. I actually just moved back from Italy, and it's exciting to see the shift in on the East Coast in the US in general, and what consumers are wanting. And they're really informing themselves. They really have, it seems like on a mass scale, have ethics in mind. They have sustainability in mind. And I think in the design and architectural lens, that's an exciting thing for the world.
Absolutely. It's been really exciting. Because the other thing is the products even within the industry have changed. Over time it was, started out with like a couple gummies and, some bud, and like now you've got drinks and you've got creams, skin creams, and, it's just amazing to see the evolution. And again, like how the excitement about wellness has really infused the industry. It's just been a world of learning and excitement. It's just really fun to be on the edge of I guess evolution.
Absolutely. And I think even Martha Stewart's in the business now, which is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I was just even at CVS, and it's not cannabis, but CVS has their own CBD lines now.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
It's very interesting because you see, this is true on a lot of these, like CVS, Target, I can't remember where else. They're all producing their own lines. I'm sure they're under another brand, but how they're marketing and how they're displaying the product, everything's changing very, very fast.
It's incredible. I mean, this is a very fast growing market. So of course it needs to be sort of designed differently now, I think, for the growing consumer.
I think because it is all focused on wellness, and you see the product and wellness, that's where the architecture must actually pick up the pace, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Because they need to mirror each other. True branding is when your product and your space are having the same conversation. And I think as architecture and design, there's the beginning of this conversation, but we have a long way to catch up, I think. And some of it is brands taking risks to they're two different teams, right? Development of retail outlets is a different team than their product development, but it's like they need to sort of have a little bit more of a conversation so that there's more unity. And I think in the hospitality industry, it's a little bit further along, quite frankly, where you see hotels who are producing their own or have their own lines. Obviously, they're not producing it, of care products, but they're starting to change the materials that they use.
Right, so that they're more sustainable. They're not.
So they're more sustainable.
Plastic, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and even many more experiences. So again, where the design and the space the design of the space and the experiences that they're having or offering are integrated, right? So yeah, it's a very exciting time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this is interesting. The look of many dispensaries on the West Coast look like an apothecary or a luxury boutique. Do you think there are learning from the fashion and beauty industries in terms of creating a customer experience?
I do. I think there's like maybe 3 different dispensary styles.
Mhm.
There's the apothecary style, which I think is the luxury side, right? And then, yes, I do think that they're looking at fashion. I think they're looking at jewelry. They're looking at, high-end jewelry. Again, that's the way I kind of tend to look at it. And then there's sort of this middle zone, which is a little bit more pop culture. So those dispensaries are, integrated often with music, like, one of them that we work with, Hastoria, who has Raekwon from Wu-Tang Clan as part of is one of their investors or founders. So they're integrating they're integrating a specific culture, whereas I think Cookies has another, I don't remember who it is, but Cookies has like a whole fashion brand. Their look is less apothecary and is more sort of hip youngster. And then you've got like the old school cannabis locations, which are kind of meant to be not just a little bit on the grungy side. Like it's a little, they're like 3 different populations. And so as the industry grows, like, will they all merge into one? I don't know. It also has something to do with who's using what technology. It has to do with the type of the fixturing. Like I think in the apothecary style, the fixtures tend to be very high level design and exquisite and custom made. And then of course, obviously, if you're doing, it just sort of travels to the other side.
That reflects different price points and different needs. We have another question here, returning to design in the home. This is from Rosemary, please give an idea how to convert a room as studio for online content making.
Ah, interesting. So I think one of the most important things is, obviously it's the backdrop, but creating a backdrop that has some sort of texture or movement, and or just like very large scale pattern, right? So if you're, for example, like behind me, I've got, it's like a,
yeah, I was noticing.
It's actually an Eames piece, but because it's wavy, you have different reflectivity, but it's not terribly distracting. I think if you are doing a pattern behind you, it really needs to be like, if it's a floral, very large scale. Also, ideally, you have a window in front of you, at least for daytime projects. And, then it's setting up your camera.
Yeah, for the good.
I mean, I don't have the best environment, but.
No, it looks great. Another question, do trends that start in architecture and design often migrate into fashion and accessories?
It goes the opposite. It is the opposite. I mean, maybe it's a little double-sided, but when I look at fashion for what's going to happen in architecture and design, it's usually like 2, depending on where you are in the US, 2 to 3 years. I mean, even being in Montclair, 12 miles outside Manhattan, sometimes it can be 12 to 18 months before we see it. When I say in particular color, but it's even detailing. So, or the way faceting in clothing, or maybe even, accessorizing, like with belts and jewelry, like the types of metals that you see ultimately become the trend in architecture and design, but it's really after.
Interesting. And would you say that design in general follows like culture shifts? Like, has the pandemic influenced design? Has, a certain political moment in history influence design?
I absolutely think it does. I mean, it's interesting. I was reading an article that accentuates that, and it was kind of mortifying because they were talking about how wallpaper, whatever in the 1700s or whenever it was actually used to like disguise all of the smashed bugs on the wall. And that the white wall came as like this purification, like so that we could see how clean spaces were.
Of course.
And so, I mean, when I read this, I was like, oh my God. I mean, sure, absolutely, it makes sense.
Right.
But, I do think, just as an example, after 9/11, after we started to recover from that, an immense amount of color came into the industry.
Mhm.
When you need to heal or you need to start to, there's a change. And so I do think we're seeing a lot of white right now because of the pandemic and the cleanliness. Like, I think that is part of it. Even within our office, we talk about it all the time, that how much we're all in this white moment. But I think probably once we get, please let it be in the next 12 months. A little bit of relief. I don't know. Yeah. There's just gonna be a color explosion. And I think there already was, but it was very brief. There was a color explosion in spring when everybody was feeling good. And now it's, got to return back. So
yeah, it's true. It's true. But it's interesting to see how in accessories and design and accessories for the home, because that's a whole other space as well in design, how they really can reflect the times.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think we will see accessories and accessories for the home move towards a lot. I mean, they already have, but continue in the organic nature. Like, again, you're seeing a lot of matte and muted finishes and textures. And even in the metals, it's similar. Like, you see a lot of, obviously we've been in a brass moment for a while now, but that really flat brass, almost, it's almost as if it's soft. I think that's just going to continue. And it's when you see textures and colors that read as soft, you relax. And that's really what we all need.
So true. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Should we take any questions, if there are any other questions?
I only saw one more question on there because Valentina, you were nailing them. It had to do with the look of dispensaries on the West Coast looking like an apothecary or luxury boutique. Do we think that they're learning from the fashion and beauty industry in terms of creating the look and customer experience?
Well, we actually got that one. We talked about that one.
All right, I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's okay, that's okay.
I thought you did that one. Then I think we are caught up. Unless anyone else has any questions, feel free to jump in. And then what I will suggest is that if you want to see some of Rachel's work, check out Accessories Magazine. You can find it at accessoriescouncil.org. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, Rachel, if they have questions or they need help.
Sure, absolutely. They can email me at Rachael, Rachael, at rhgdesign.com. You can also find us on Instagram at rhgdesign. And I'd love to hear from anyone and talk to you about what your visions are.
Great. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Your information is in the chat now. So if anybody wants it, you can grab a picture. There'll be a recording of the session on accessoriescouncil.org. You can check out our YouTube channel and hopefully check you out in the magazine. So thank you both very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Right.
And thanks, Valentina. It was really nice to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I wish you both a wonderful afternoon.
You too.
Bye. Bye, Rachel.
Bye.